Welcome to the home front. Every crisis is an opportunity. I had a friend who liked to say that. It was one of his favorite expressions. It's true, but it doesn't change the fact that every crisis is also a crisis. Things happen in life which interfere with our preconceived notions of how everything should just be plain sailing. And especially in a marriage, when a crisis happens to one person, how does the spouse deal with that? How does the spouse offer support in times of need? Rabbi.
Yes, crises do happen. I think there's two approaches to a crisis of someone who's close to you, to be helpful, to be supportive. You can either just show compassion and be there as a sounding board and show real interest, or you can actually get actively involved and provide solutions. Very often, the first is what is called for. If something happens, let's say a spouse has some social issue going on with friends or something happening at work, and really the spouse hasn't got much to do to help out, but what they can do is just be there, just let the person feel he's not in this alone, that there's a supporting backbone, full of understanding, that even if the worst can happen at work, and we know what that is, little pink slip, let the person know that the spouse is fully behind you. And don't worry, we'll sort this out. There's a divine guiding hand in this world, and if something nasty and negative is happening to you, it means that it's all for the good. So by projecting a very positive and supporting and compassionate and soft message, very often that is really what's called for.
How do you balance that? Because that could get annoying, I can imagine. If you're down in the dumps because you just got that little pink slip, let's say, and someone keeps saying, don't worry, it's all going to be fine, and you're wondering how you're going to pay for the other pink slip of your brand new car you just bought.
Yeah, so I would say you're much safer off being compassionate and being supportive. You're right, it can sometimes be a little bit annoying. You know, I'm here down in the dumps and everything is, the whole world is looking black for me, and my spouse is saying, no, don't worry, this is only an opportunity. This is an opportunity for new horizons. You're probably made for better things, and I'm sure we'll find a better job. And I always felt that your energies were not being maximized in that situation, and that you were being dwarfed over there by more powerful bullying elements. On the contrary, let's now look up and let's see if we can find something much more suited to your energies. So if a person takes a very positive, consistent type of posture, I think that usually is extremely helpful. If the person becomes infected with the same doldrums and the same depression, your spouse, your husband staggers in from work and things are going very, very bad, and the wife's response is, oy vey, oh, that's terrible, what are we going to do? But how are we going to feed the kids, and how can we? Then you're only fanning the flames. On the contrary, by being there and by being a supportive, strong element, it will give the spouse much more backbone to face up. And he leaves home with a confidence. I know that I've always got the home front to rely on. You know, there's a concept in the Talmud called a pat b'salo, that if a person is hungry, even if he's really nutritionally deprived, but if he knows that he has some food in storage, so it somehow dissipates the hunger. Just the mere psychological knowledge that he's not at the very absolute bottom, and there is hope in the offing, that already gives the person confidence. So the big world and the outside world and all the interactions in the outside world can be very rough sometimes. But if a person knows that he can come home and there's someone who's going to help him lick his wounds and help him build his confidence, I think his posture and his self-image will be enhanced, and he will be able to face the crisis in a much more assertive and a much more confident way.
What's the balance between, on the one hand, sympathizing or empathizing, which would seem to require being in that or understanding that emotional space that the other person's in, and on the other hand, trying to build them up?
Yeah, so it's like it's a tightrope, it's a delicate balance. And I don't think one can give really hard and fast rules. I think it's very much largely an extent of the given situation. You have situations often where sometimes if one person is very, very down and very depressed and the other person comes in, and I think you were referring to that earlier, in a very up and high mood, it really gets on the other person's nerves. And you've got to bridge that gap. You've got to try and bring it closer to each other. So don't start out all, peppy.
Everything's great, let's go celebrate.
Yeah. Don't. So be compassionate, be sensitive, let the person feel that you're feeling their pain. But on the other hand, keep that silver lining in this cloud. Keep it very much in the forefront. But do it sensitively, do it with sense. Keep the par between the two moods of the two spouses, keep it at a reasonable level. But there's a principle in human interaction that when someone is consistently in a certain positive frame of mind, if the person is being sensitive and sensible about it, then it will usually pull up the one from the one who's on the down. So I think that's a general rule of thumb. Be compassionate. Now, it could be that the spouse is really asking for advice.
So before we move on to that, Rabbi, if I may, I just want to, you mentioned in passing depression, that a person feels depressed. So obviously there's the difference between feeling a little bit in the doldrums and actually being clinically depressed. How do you, just briefly for us, how do you identify when it's beyond your help, it's beyond your means to help someone out, when they're depressed beyond just normal cheering up?
Yeah, look, if there's a chemical imbalance and it's something objective and it requires a medical intervention, that's one issue. But let's say a person is depressed as a result of a series of things not going right in their life. It's very often a question of attitude. And attitude is something that a person can help the other one change it. But you've got to do it sensitively. So I think that most depressions are not chemical imbalance that require, let's say, medication or whatever, or professional intervention. Most depressions are really a function of a lack of self-image, the wrong type of attitude to facing up to life's challenges. And these, with sense and with loving compassion, these can be helped along. Merely the knowledge of knowing that I've got a very supportive spouse, and no matter how bad things are outside, but I know I come home to the loving environment and to a warm environment, and they respect me, even if I'm losing my self-respect outside in the workplace, but at home I'm a king. I think that goes a very long way.
Are there any specific warning signs that you could tell that a person acts differently if it is a sort of chemical imbalance, something which needs professional treatment, or it's just more extreme?
I think it's more extreme, and I think that a person, and it has to be consistent, and it has to be that nothing helps. But usually you can spruce a person up with some positive things, a bit of humor sometimes. Of course, again, the humor's got to be well placed. When a person's sad and at the point of tears and you cracking jokes, that's too far apart in order to bridge that gap. Bridge the gap and then slowly start. And it's the same thing with children. Children sometimes come home from school and they've had a rough time. They've been bullied. They've had the whole class gang up on them on some trivial issue. But from the child's perspective, it's a very painful thing. So again, it's the same principle. The same principle is show compassion, show support, build the person up, give the person a sense of self-worth, focus on the person's strong points. And that's also with the spouse, So, they may not be recognizing your work environment, might not recognize your talents, and therefore they're ostracizing you. But I know, as your spouse, what great talents you have. And I know that we just have to together, we're going to work on this together, and we're going to hone these talents, and we're going to channel them, and we're going to direct them. And I think this goes a long way and this works in the vast majority of cases. Don't ever let a very sad spouse or very depressed spouse pull you down with you. You've got to be this anchor that is supporting and holding them up. Now, as we started saying earlier, sometimes there just is a need for good advice. Now, be very careful with the advice, because you don't know the individuals and the personalities involved, and from your perspective, you may not have ever met this boss who's being nasty and being bullying or whatever it is. So you can't take very affirmative and very definitive stands. You can be more general. You can say, why don't you try the following tactic? Why don't you try and find some good points in this terrorizing boss's personality and try and somehow change the nature of your relationship by focusing on good points or interests. If you discover that he's got an interest in fishing, so read up a bit about fishing, and when he's about to, to slaughter you, tell him, I heard that you're a very good fisherman. I've also got a bit of interest, and start discussing it, divert it.
Let him win at golf.
No? Oh, let him win at golf. That's also true. I have a close family member who was a brilliant chess player, and when he was in the army, he was, as a Jew, he was being persecuted. Anti-Semitically, he was being persecuted for being a Jew.
I'm assuming this wasn't the Israeli army.
No, it wasn't. This is an army abroad. This is actually the South African army. And he was being persecuted by a very nasty sergeant major, depriving him of his rights. And then one day he heard that the sergeant major actually fancies himself as a chess player. So here was this fellow who was quite famous as a chess player with championships on his side. So he went to the sergeant major and said, I heard you play chess, and I also play a bit of chess. And then the sergeant major discovered that he's a very prominent chess player, so they promptly started playing. And of course, he made sure that he lost to the sergeant major every time. And he became his pet and his preferred fellow, as long as he kept losing to the sergeant major. So that's an extreme example. And it doesn't necessarily work at a normal intellectual level. But sometimes giving general pieces of advice of this nature without getting too specific, because if you get too specific, the person's reaction will be, you really don't understand what's going on. Thank you for your advice, but you really don't understand. So don't get into the very nitty-gritty, detailed advice, but give a more general types of things, general advice. The same thing happens with, as I say, we mentioned kids. Sometimes the kid is really terrorized by a teacher. So there are ways of winning favor, of carrying favor. And this can be, you can give general advice in these things. So you have to be very discerning. You can even offer. You can say, would you like me to make some suggestions? And the person may say, no, you won't understand it. Okay, fine. But what I can tell you is I just know that you're a great person and you've got great talents, and truth will prevail ultimately. And even if the worst happens, it's only for the good. And I can see from this, your whole career is going to be on an upward, start going upward. So I think that's probably a general good way of balancing those two.
I think it's very important to figure out what's required, and people can be different in what they need. They need either practical help, advice, or they need emotional support. Usually it's a bit of both, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. And you've got to be discerning on that, and don't be too definitive and say, I know everything, let me tell you how to handle the situation. I'm in the situation, what do you know about how to handle the situation? So don't take that very demagogic type of approach. I'll tell you how to do it. But no, on the contrary, maybe perhaps try this, etc. All the time showing support and showing your confidence and building the self-worth of the person.
I guess traditionally people see a difference between men and women in what they need or think of as a solution to their problems, whether they need practical advice or emotional advice. Classically, I mean, you could see it as a bit misogynistic maybe it has been seen like that, although maybe you'll tell us it isn't like that, it's just a fact of life, but that women in general want to talk more about the issues, want to feel supported, whereas men in general are looking for solutions. Would you agree with that characterization?
Yeah, well, actually the biggest issue has been solved by technology. You always had the classic situation of husband and wife driving, the husband's driving, and he's hopelessly lost, and the wife has a much better natural inbuilt sense of direction, and the husband is absolutely not interested in hearing her suggestions. I'm driving, just keep out of this. So now Waze and GPS have kind of solved that, so that's one whole sector of discord that has now been remedied.
Thank God for GPS.
And even more so for Waze.
Oh.
Okay.
They're going to pay us for advertising.
No doubt.
We should mention Google Maps as well.
Okay.
Google Maps is also great.
Yeah. Okay. I go with that. Sometimes one wishes that one had a Google map for emotional issues. Unfortunately, it's only very physical and very earthy. But sometimes one really needs Waze and Google Maps and GPS and whatever other technology they're going to invent to just help a person steer through crises. You need to know which direction to take. But I think we really do have something inbuilt. Very often, a rule of thumb is, if you're a real, honest-to-goodness person and you have an honest, close relationship with your spouse, then follow your heart, follow his heart. Leave it to kind of natural feelings to prevail. When I say natural feelings, I don't mean feelings at the time of strife or at the time of crises, because those feelings are sometimes very dangerous. Sometimes there's anger, sometimes there's bitterness. Person should not be taking decisions in a time of anger or bitterness or depression. But let's say we can push these aside and one can change the general atmosphere in the home, then you can allow one's natural gut feelings to take over.
GPS, gut, practical suggestions.
Right.
I like it. So you're saying people do have, but the problem is there can sometimes be an interference, right? We have an inbuilt sense of what's the right way to react to something, especially, I guess, a spouse whom you've known for a while and you know what they need. It's just that when the emotions start to cloud things, you don't get it right all the time. But how much would you say that it's true to say that this is characteristic of men and women in general? That there's a difference between men and women, that men are generally looking for practical solutions, whereas women are looking to discuss for emotional support. That's something you hear quite a lot.
Yeah, look, that whole issue of viva la différence between man, did I get that right?
We'll have to ask our French friends.
You only know English, I see. Sometimes there is there are inherent differences between male and female. This we know. And these inherent differences are rooted in a very deep place. It's not just environmental and circumstantial, or even not just physical. We believe that there's a real deep-seated difference because their souls, which is the inner spiritual makeup, is somewhat different. And your biggest proof of that is that there's a whole sector of commandments that women are absolved from. Now, if the guiding principle of commandments in the Torah is in order to refine one's personality and to hone one's spiritual being and develop it, so surely there should be the same. Homo sapiens, human beings, surely have the same, but we see that there is an inherent difference in the spiritual makeup, that's the inner makeup between a male and a female. And one has to be very sensitive to this issue. I know it's not a very popular issue, it's maybe not even proper speech to highlight any differences in in the post-women's lib era where there should be a complete and utter equality.
One of my favorite Oscar Wilde quotes, Rabbi, is that he once said, "When I find too many people beginning to agree with me, I suspect I might be wrong."
I see.
So I admire that you are able to speak out even when you think that maybe people may not agree that much.
I'll face the music later.
When the angry letters start coming in, I'll let you know.
But this is a fact. Now, people always presuppose when you say that there's a difference between male and female, that the chauvinism would immediately say, well, obviously the male is superior and the female.
Wait, that's not true?
And the female is inferior. Young man, you've got a lot to learn. So the real definition of this is they are different. They are different, complementary and different, and you can't compare giraffes to camels. They're just two different species, and so by the same token, the inner spiritual, emotional makeup of a male and a female are somewhat different, and they're made in this manner because they need to be different, because clones don't get married. It won't make for a good marriage. You need contrariness in marriage, people coming from different perspectives, which will keep both sides, both parties, much more sharp and on their toes when they are meeting up with someone different who is complementing, sometimes maybe even getting on their nerves slightly. But that's also part of the whole growing process.
So it's very interesting you say that, because one of the things we hear a lot is people saying, oh, she's trying to change me. He's trying to change me. I don't want to change. I am who I am.
Yeah.
But it seems like, according to what you're saying, the whole purpose of getting married is in order that you should change.
Yes, but we don't say it too loudly, and no one likes to hear that, because the person really has a certain self-image. I'm just the perfect Mr. Perfect. Very often when one gets into situations of conflict or situations of where people are grating against each other, a person begins to realize, well, maybe I need to adjust my attitudes and my approach and my Weltanschauung to certain things. And that's a healthy exercise. It's a very healthy exercise. Marriage is the arena for self-growth, more so than any other area of one's life. One only begins real self-growth when one is in the context of marriage. There's nothing to beat a 2-year-old who is slowly training us to what does it mean to be tolerant? What does it mean to be patient? What does it mean to be compassionate? But you don't need to get to a 2-year-old. Sometimes the need to be responsive to one's spouse's needs means that a person's got to come out of himself and come out of his, I'm taking, let's say, the male in his image and self-image. In order to really be understanding and compassionate of his wife, he's got to put himself into her shoes to some extent and try and understand her. That's a fantastic growing exercise. That enables a person to just to fine-tune many aspects of his personality. So this issue of differences is healthy. It's healthy, and it's a healthy exercise to be to be engaged in this process.
It comes out then that crises, things that happen in a marriage which cause potentially more friction are times when we can endeavor to grow more. These are times when however big the resistance. So we all know from going to the gym. I can tell you go to the gym and lift weights a lot. That the higher the resistance, the more the muscle grows. So it would be the same thing in relationships, right?
Yeah, that is true. We are not afraid of conflict in marriage. On the contrary, we feel that conflict, when handled correctly, there are rules of how to fight clean. So we're not concerned at all about conflict. On the contrary, we view conflict as a potential way of growing. A person has rough edges to his personality, inevitably. Let's say the young man and the young lady who just got married. Now they're carrying the baggage of 20, 30-odd years of their life experiences. Not all of them are necessarily positive. A person comes in with, what we call in the professional language, hang-ups. Now a person comes in with these issues, some idiosyncrasies, some kind of modes of social misbehavior, and marriage, by virtue of the inbuilt conflicts is a great way of sort of smoothing over the rough edges. And again, it's all got to be taken in a very positive spirit. In a sense, a person's got to be ready to be humble and not walk around haughty, I am who I am, and I am what I am, and I'm great. It takes, like we said, a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 6-month-old baby. I mean, I recall once going into a very elegant apartment store with my wife, trying to, she needed to do some shopping, and I was left holding the baby. And it was quite a classy joint. And my child decided that she's going to throw my hat on the floor. So I spent an hour holding her to keep her away from her mother so her mother could buy dresses, but defending my hat. And I found myself very awkwardly, constantly bending down, picking up my hat, picking up my spectacles that had been thrown down in the process. And by the end of that session, I think I was pegged down to where I was. I was no longer this rabbinic picture of dignity. My little, 1.5-year-old had really given me some fantastic therapy. So, that's an extreme example, but I think every intimate, close interaction within the family unit is a healthy exercise. And I think one grows immensely from it. So we're not afraid of conflict. We have to make sure that we never step out of the bounds. And the bounds, the red lines, are we should never allow anger to set in, because anger will destroy every element of it. It will no longer be an educational exercise. It will, anger evokes responsive anger. So in this framework, if one keeps one's wits about oneself and one views everything as a new educational challenge, and, oh, good, this is coming to me. I needed to hear this. Good. And I think a positive attitude to interaction is something which is very valuable.
So that's quite some ideal to live up to. Never be angry, always contribute in a positive way to what your spouse needs. But at least with some of these practical tools, the GPS of life, that means being able to, in a calm way, assess what your spouse needs, whether it's support emotionally or whether it's practical suggestions, a person can try and find their way on through the map of life and try and help their spouse find the correct route to their destination.